My name is Eliza Warren. I am 34 years old, and I am from Duluth, Minnesota. I used to believe that a life could be measured by the weight of ordinary days, the quiet ones that pass without announcement, like snow falling in the night where no one is watching. Duluth is a city that understands silence. The lake stretches wider than any thought I have ever managed to hold, and in winter the air sharpens every memory until it feels almost clean. I have lived most of my years near that shoreline, working in a public library whose windows face the gray water, shelving books that other people finished long before I began to understand my own story. There was a time when I thought staying in one place meant safety. My mother used to say that roots were a kind of promise, something that kept you from drifting into mistakes you could not undo. She never left Minnesota, not even once. And when she spoke about the world beyond it, her voice carried the careful distance of someone describing a photograph instead of a landscape. I inherited that stillness from her, or at least I thought I did. It took me 33 years to realize that stillness can also be a form of hiding. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late March, folded with the precise neatness of someone who had practiced being careful. I remember the way the envelope felt heavier than paper should, as if it carried a small gravity of its own. My name was written in blue ink, unfamiliar but deliberate, each curve steady. I almost set it aside with the rest of the mail utility bills, a grocery flyer, a postcard from a catalog company that believed I needed brighter curtains. Nothing about the envelope suggested urgency. And yet I opened it first. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The paper contained only one sentence. I think you should know the truth about your father. For several minutes I did nothing. I stood in the kitchen holding that sentence as though it might dissolve if I moved too quickly. My father had died when I was 9, at least according to every story I had ever been told. A winter car accident on an empty highway, black ice. A phone call in the middle of the night that changed the temperature of our house forever. Grief had shaped the years that followed so completely that I had never thought to question its foundation. The photograph showed a man standing beside a fishing boat. He was older than the father I remembered, his hair threaded with gray, his shoulders slightly bent in the way of someone accustomed to wind. But the angle of his jaw was unmistakable. I knew that face the way you know your own reflection in a dark window. I sat down at the kitchen table because my knees had decided, without consulting me, that standing was no longer possible for the rest of that day. I moved through my routines as if someone else were performing them. I went to work. I checked out books. I answered a child's careful question about where the biographies were kept. I smiled at a regular patron who always returned his novels exactly one day late and apologized as though lateness were a moral failure. Everything appeared unchanged, yet beneath the surface of each moment ran a thin, trembling current of disbelief. That night I read the sentence again and again. It did not grow clearer with repetition. Truth, I realized, is a word people use when they want something from you. I did not tell my mother. She had grown smaller in recent years, not in height but in presence, as though parts of her had quietly stepped out of the room and never returned. She lived alone in the house where I grew up, surrounded by careful order. The idea of placing that photograph into her hands felt like striking glass with a stone, just to see what sound it would make. Instead, I turned the envelope over and noticed a return address in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a name I did not recognize. For 3 days I carried the knowledge of that city in my pocket like a coin I could not spend. On the 4th day, I requested time off from the library and told my supervisor I needed to visit a relative. The lie came easily, which frightened me more than the letter had. The drive south followed the edge of the lake, the water dull and patient beneath a sky the color of unpolished steel. I kept expecting to feel dramatic, transformed by purpose, but the truth is that most revelations begin in ordinary silence. I stopped once for gas, once for coffee I did not drink, and once simply to breathe air that did not belong to memory. Milwaukee smelled different, warmer. faintly metallic, threaded with the distant sweetness of something baking. I found the address on a quiet street lined with narrow houses painted in colors that had faded without quite surrendering. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not violently but persistently, like a question tapping from inside my bones. A woman answered the door before I knocked. She looked as though she had been standing there for some time, listening for the sound of my car. Her hair was silver and pulled back loosely, and her eyes held the steady patience of someone who had waded through more than one season of regret. "You're Eliza," she said. It was not a question. Hearing my name in her voice felt strangely intimate, as though she had practiced it. We sat at a small kitchen table that reminded me painfully of my own. She poured tea neither of us touched. For several minutes we spoke about nothing: the weather, the drive, the difficulty of finding parking on her street, circling the truth, the way cautious people circle deep water. Finally she folded her hands and said, "Your father didn't die in that accident." I noticed that she did not say "your mother lied." Careful language again. Precision instead of accusation. The story she told unfolded slowly, with pauses that felt less like hesitation and more like respect. My father had survived the crash. He had been injured, yes, but alive. During his recovery, he confessed something to my mother: Dad's secrets, a second life already collapsing under its own weight. I did not learn the details all at once. They came in fragments, each one small enough to hold, together large enough to change the shape of everything I believed. My mother had chosen disappearance over scandal. Not for herself, the woman explained softly, but for me. A clean grief instead of a complicated shame. A widowed child instead of a daughter who would grow up inside whispers. He wanted to come back, she said. Many times. Why didn't he? My voice sounded distant, as though it belonged to the room rather than to me. Because she asked him not to. The quiet after that sentence felt enormous. He had lived in Milwaukee under another name, working near the harbor, sending letters he never mailed. The woman across from me, his sister, my aunt, had kept those letters in a box for years, unsure whether protecting my mother's choice was kindness or cowardice. When he died the previous winter from an illness that moved too quickly for apologies, the box became a burden she could no longer carry alone. She slid it across the table. Inside were envelopes addressed in the same careful blue ink. My name written dozens of times. Dates spanning years I had spent believing in absence. I did not cry. Not then. Grief requires clarity. And clarity had not yet arrived. Instead I asked practical questions: where he was buried, what he had been like, whether he spoke about me often. Each answer landed quietly, like snow accumulating without sound. He had followed my life from a distance, school photos sent secretly, updates delivered through cautious channels, milestones observed from the far side of a decision he believed he deserved. He loved you, she said. I nodded because arguing with love felt pointless. When I finally stood to leave, the sky outside had darkened into evening. My aunt hugged me with the fragile care people use when they know touch cannot repair what words have broken. She pressed a final photograph into my hand. My father standing beside the lake. Older still, looking not at the camera but toward something beyond it. The drive home felt longer, though the miles were the same. Night gathered around the road, and with it came memories I had not visited in years. My mother, sitting at the edge of my bed after the accident, her face composed into a calm I now recognized as effort. The way she avoided certain songs, certain streets, certain dates on the calendar. I began to see her silence not as emptiness but as labor, years of holding a story closed, so mine could remain simple. By the time I reached Duluth, the first hint of dawn was touching the horizon. I parked near the lake instead of going home. The water moved with slow authority, indifferent to human revisions of truth. I opened one of the letters at random. "I saw your picture from the school play," it read. "You look brave." I hope one day you forgive the kind of love that stays away because it thinks staying would hurt more. The words blurred before I realized I was crying. I did not confront my mother immediately. Some truths require room to breathe before they can be spoken aloud. For several weeks I carried the letters with me, reading them in quiet corners of the library, on park benches, in the still minutes before sleep. Each one revealed a man both familiar and strange, funny in small ways, careful with regret, endlessly attentive to a daughter he watched grow through second-hand light. Understanding arrived gradually, not as a single revelation but as a series of soft recognitions. My mother had not stolen my father from me. She had tried, in the only way she knew, to give me a childhood untouched by the consequences of adult mistakes. My father had not abandoned me. He had obeyed a boundary he believed was mercy. Love, I realized, is sometimes indistinguishable from loss. When I finally visited my mother, spring had begun to loosen winter's grip. We sat in her living room surrounded by the quiet order she maintained like a shield. I placed a photograph on the table between us. Her eyes closed before she touched it, as though she had rehearsed this moment in dreams she never described. He died in January, I said gently. She nodded once. No surprise, only exhaustion. We spoke for a long time, longer than any conversation we had shared in years. There were tears, yes, but also something steadier beneath them. Not forgiveness exactly. Something closer to recognition. To people acknowledging the impossible geometry of choices made long ago. I wanted you to have a simple story, she whispered. I know, I said. And for the first time, I truly did. That summer I traveled to Milwaukee again, this time to stand beside a grave marked with a name I had never spoken aloud. I brought one of the letters and read it quietly into the wind, not because I believed he could hear me, but because saying the words felt like completing a sentence left unfinished for decades. I told him about the library, about the lake, about the way my life had unfolded in gentle, ordinary lines. I told him I was angry, and that I understood, and that both things could exist together without destroying each other. When I finished, the air remained still, offering no dramatic sign. Just silence, honest and sufficient. On the drive back north, I felt something unfamiliar, space where certainty used to live. It was not emptiness. It was possibility. I still work at the library. I still walk beside the lake in the evenings. From the outside, nothing about my life appears transformed. But inside, the map has changed. The past is no longer a single closed door. It is a hallway of rooms, some bright, some shadowed, all part of the same house I carry forward. And I understand now that identity is not built from perfect truths, but from the quiet courage to hold complicated ones without turning away, trusting that even the stories shaped by silence can lead, eventually, toward a gentler kind of wholeness.